one of the biggest challenges is, truth be told, litigation.
Looking back through the 80s and 90s and now how healthcare is today, give us kind of like your perspective, having been in the system back then. Is it a lot worse? Is it any better? What's the dimensionality of it? Because it seems like it's generally hopeless, and we just are going through the process of switching from a PEO to a captive. And
Done that.
it's a very interesting process, and I know thanks Jordan and team who are helping with that transition, because we want to make sure that we're always going to get as good of care or better,
Right.
and then also focus on the outcomes of team members because we now have a vested interest in the health and well-being of individuals within the company versus
Sure.
just stroking a check and seeing how it goes out. What's your perspective? Because especially from the family perspective, this is something you wanted to affect change. How do you see the US marketplace from that perspective? And maybe from a global perspective, if you have any.
Well, if you really look at it, we have one of the highest costs of healthcare in the world, and yet our outcomes don't compare. I think there's a number of challenges. Do looking back at where it was when I was in it, and now, as I still say, stay close to it. Technologically, we progressed exponentially, right? Um, but, one of the biggest challenges is, truth be told, litigation. I think that if you're going to help fix the healthcare system, you've got to have tort reform.
Tort reform.
You've got to have that because there's so much that is being done that is nothing more than I've got to protect myself from litigation versus really managing a clinical outcome,
Mm.
right? And so that adds massive amounts of cost to the system. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, for example, later in my career, I was with a company called US Surgical, and that's a funny story how it happened. But to put it in perspective, we were doing what's called a mid cab, which is a coronary, they call it cabbage, coronary artery bypass graft. We were doing them laparoscopically in Europe 5 years before we were doing them in the US because of all of the regulatory issues and just the challenges of getting things through the 10K process and everything else. So that, or 510K, that really created a lot of challenges and a lot of cost as well. So the cost of delivery on medication and devices and procedures and everything else, that regulatory pressure. So if we can reform the tort, handle the tort reform side, and also find ways to streamline the regulatory process, I think we can take massive amounts of costs out of the system, get better outcomes for the patient, and because the technology is there. Um, it's just you can't get it to the end user fast enough.